obviously a lot of people who listen to this podcast are going to be huge fans of your work, not only with Elton John, but with some of the amazing artists that you've worked for all over the years. My first question for you is, you've been a musical director and a kind of, part of the band of a big star for a lot of your life, and you've done an amazing job at it. But I was actually listening to your solo records today, and do you ever think that do you ever wish like you'd pursued that side of things more than you have?
Well, I'm actually doing it right now. It's interesting you should ask that to start. Yeah, because this whole COVID thing that's been happening. I mean, we got back from Australia. I arrived back here in California on the 9th of March, knowing that we were going to be canceling some dates. So we were already aware of that. But it wasn't for another month maybe that we knew the extent of the whole thing and what would be not happening for a while. And large events is the number one thing. We're the guys who are going to be last back to work, essentially, as far as touring and stuff like that goes. So when that reality set in, I enjoy sitting around playing my own music anyway, just playing, I like to compose a little bit every day. When I say compose, I don't just sit down at a piano and start writing on a score. I just literally pick up a guitar and sit around and play what I feel like playing. And what's happened is those ideas have morphed back into kind of back to what I was doing when I first got into music. The reason that I got into music was because I loved it, just passionate about it. And so it's very kind of a organic, kind of acoustic-y thing, based, and then it's using all the stuff that I've learned over the decades of doing what I do. But yeah, we've got a bunch of things right now that I've done, and I'm recording them with my son Charlie, who's just graduating from USC, in a music production course, and he's my engineer and keyboard player. So that's awesome. And so we record stuff at the house, and then I'll take the stuff to another room, which is a little bit bigger, still a very homegrown kind of setup. I'm enjoying doing this thing very organically, very small, and just building it up from there. And it's sounding really cool. So I'm very happy about it.
That's amazing. So do you think you'll put it out? Because I reckon a lot of
I will at some point. I've just got to I've got to clear it with my family first, because so far my kids are all over this thing with me. They're playing on it, they're singing on it, they're engineering on it, they're probably going to mix it, because all my kids play something. My son Jesse's played drums on like 3 tracks so far. Charlie's played on 1. My youngest Elliot has sung on 4 tracks already. He's got a killer voice. This kid is going to be a star, I think, at some point.
That's
so it's great.
And so in terms of the drums, were you tracking that at home as well, just like miking them up at home?
Well, that's what we're doing with my guitars and amps and stuff like that, and other instruments and bass. I've been playing bass and everything too. But for example, with Jesse, he lives down in East LA, so I send him the basics, send him stems and files, and he does it remotely and then sends it back, and we move on from there. So it's a very cool way of working in this socially conscious kind of environment right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, how has that been for you? Because obviously, the Elton John Band are one of the most prolific, unknown to some people, who are less familiar with your guys' schedule. But, it's sort of on a normal year for the last, 20 years plus has been at least 100 shows. And that's, without all the thousands of shows before that. So how is it from going kind of traveling all around the world, hectic pace, kind of, this is too much for me, to then kind of just being at home for so long? Have you struggled? Do you kind of miss the road? Or are you enjoying time with family?
I don't miss it at all. I don't miss it. I mean, I've done so many, as you pointed out, I've done so many tours, so many shows. It's just insane. I think what happened for me recently with live stuff, and I know for sure with Elton also, uh, especially it happened the beginning of, well, middle of last year. The touring, we were aware that this farewell tour we're doing right now was a big event. It was like, this is our goodbye to touring. So
Yeah.
it became really important to us. And not that it wasn't important to us before, but something really clicked in. And I started really going for it every night on stage with the mindset that, hey, we're going to give everything tonight. And as I said, not that I hold anything back ever, but this is taking it to a different level. This is our last time out. Let's just kill it every night. And so, especially from Elton and myself, he would call me in after shows and say, "What's going on? This is the best we've ever played. What is happening?" And so, it's out of respect for the audiences, number one, out of respect for our own music and our own musicianship, that we're going out on stage every night and having a great time. So that's really what it was about, and that's what it's been. We're raising the bar every single night we play.
Yeah.
So that's pretty wild for a consistent band, but we're having a great time doing it. So it is a shame that we're going to be on hold. Well, we haven't played in 6 months, and it's going to be another year probably before we do anything live in the UK.
Yeah.
Probably the next time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people will be looking forward to that. But is it going to be quite strange, because you guys have been playing so consistently and you're quite famous for not rehearsing that much. So what, are you going to have to put some elbow grease back in the practice room, or is it going to be a case of these songs so well you could probably pick them up in 10 years and you'd still be playing them well?
Well, I do have a great memory, a great musical memory, so that's never been a problem for me. But I do rehearse actually with the band. Before every tour, I always rehearse for at least a week with the band, just to make, because some of those guys have never played, many of the songs that we might choose to do in a new set, so or even this farewell tour, we're changing a couple of songs here and there. So I have to get the band together and then bring my surrogate in, Adam Chester, who plays Elton and sings Elton so well. In fact, it'd be very hard to do this for me without Adam, because I need to rehearse to know that we're starting from a really good place with the band.
Yeah.
And also it's very helpful for Elton, because he loathes to rehearse. He loathes and detests more than he hates probably journalists. He's unbelievable. He's incredible. And so it's great for me that I can work with Adam and the band, and we have private time, and we just rehearse for a week and put it all together and brush it up where necessary. And so that's a cool thing. But as far as me, I'm not going to be missing, because I know all the stuff, and it's part of my blood. It's in me, so I know the stuff so well. And we know what this tour is. This tour has become a beautiful juggernaut of shows, which the audiences are loving, and we're enjoying playing. So when the time comes that we get back to it, hopefully we will at some point, then I know it's not going to be a huge problem for me, but I'll probably take the band in for 2 weeks before and make sure everybody knows what they're doing.
Wow, that's amazing to think it would just be a couple of weeks and you guys could get back into it. It was an interesting thought, because I know that I know that Adam Chester usually rehearses. Do you think Elton will have to go in with you this time, or do you reckon he'll still, the loathing of rehearsals will stay strong?
No, he'll definitely come in for a couple of days, because even though we know what this tour is, he's very conscientious. He's very conscious of the audience, obviously, and his own voice and what he's doing. So, no, he will come in, and probably for the last day and a bit, and during the day that's a bit, he'll probably play 2 or 3 songs and say, "Fine, that sounds good, great," So he really is, he's very grateful for what I do with the band prior to him coming in. But, he will come in for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the way it works is the way it works, and it sounds brilliant. So no one for a minute would question the process, for sure. And right. I'm sure he's extremely grateful to have you as the musical director. So one of the things that my listeners might not be aware of is that among many other tracks, you actually co-wrote some of Elton's songs, including probably, I would say could be the best Elton John track, if not, and certainly one of the best songs of all time. I guess that's why they call it the blues. And I kind of wanted to focus in on that. Like, do you remember writing it and how that came about? Because it's such a great track. You can play it thousands.
Thanks, Tom. I'm obviously super proud of that song, and I love the song myself. I mean, we wrote it in Montserrat during the sessions for Too Low for Zero, and I'd normally get to the studio just after Elton, because when we worked in Montserrat, what happened was, we'd each have a villa on the island, and then we'd all come down and merge and meet at the studio and start work for the day. And I took to walking there every day in the morning, because it's beautiful. It was an island in the West Indies, and just gorgeous. And so I would walk there the couple of miles, whatever it was, and get to the studio just around the time that Elton's getting there. And we would sit around and talk about stuff. And this one day he had said, look, this track I think should be written with guitar, because it's he told me the title, and I'd actually seen the lyric. I sneaked a peek with Bernie when we were traveling down together from California to Montserrat, and he was saying about the lyrics. During the flight, we were sitting next to each other and chatting about it, and during the time of getting very, very drunk, actually. But I said, so show us a couple, show us a few lyrics. I want to see what it's like, And he said, well, I don't do that usually. And I said, I know, but I won't tell. So he showed me a couple, and Blues was one of the songs. And when I read that lyric, it was like, my God, I appreciate Bernie's work so much anyway. And I met Bernie before I met Elton, actually. But, when I read that lyric, it was like, wow, another killer, another brilliant, moving thing. And that was before any music was written. So I hadn't been thinking about the music until Elton said, let's do a guitar-based song. So we sat down in the studio and we wrote it in 20 minutes, I think, and that was it.
It's just unbelievable, and there are a lot of chord changes in that song.
Right.
Very different, obviously, to a normal blues. But yeah, I mean, the lyric again, something to really highlight. That's so interesting that you kind of saw the lyric first. I think it could be one of the best of Bernie's lyrics, because it's so simple. You think that it's quite kind of underrated, because all kind of music journos and stuff, they say 1970 to 1976 is classic Elton John, but Too Low for Zero was a really killer album, I thought, all the way through.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I mean, couldn't agree more. It's a plus. It was very special to all of us, because that was the band, the original band, coming back together again. Because I mean, in '81, I think I was in New York on a tour with Meatloaf. Because I mean, when I wasn't working with Elton, I worked with Stevie Nicks and the Pointer Sisters and Alice Cooper, and Meatloaf was one of the people that I worked with. But so I was in New York, and I got a call from Elton, and it was like really late at night, and I was like, hi, how you doing, man? And we hadn't talked for about a year probably. And he said, so listen, I'm kind of not getting anywhere with what I think I should be doing. So do you want to put the band back together? So it was one of those moments where I actually had no hesitation, because there's a magic about what Elton and myself, Dee and Nigel have created. And then with Ray Cooper amalgamated and made it even more special. This is such an important thing and a very magical relationship, and there was no question in my mind at all. It was like, sure, let's do it. So he said, okay, we're going to Australia 1st of January. We'll go down there, rehearse, do a tour. We'll tour for the whole year basically, and then we'll record in September, October in Montserrat. And that's what we did. And it's very, very special occasion. And like you said, a lot of great stuff on that album. I mean, just amazing. I mean, I'm Still Standing was not a weak song at all, and this other stuff we'd have done in Montserrat. I mean, it was a very, very strong record all the way around. And the comical thing about When I'm Still Standing was such a smash out of the gate as the first single. I forget what happened, but they released something else in between. I can't remember what it was. Something else came out. as the second single. And I remember calling up whoever it was. I think it was Gus. No, Chris Thomas. I'm very sorry. Chris Thomas. Actually, Chris's wife's on the phone to my wife right now. So I better, give Chris the credit because he's a brilliant producer, as you well know. And I called Chris and said, when are they going to release Blues? What's going on with, I guess that's what they call it. That's the record, isn't it? That's the one. And he said, I don't know, but the record companies seem to be, not sure. And they're kind of questioning different things. And when it finally did come out, it was like, okay. And the first time I heard it on the radio, I remember having a big smile on my face and thinking, I'm so happy, if for no other reason, just to hear this on the radio as a single, because I had written another single with Elton, Grow Some Funk of Your Own, back in '75. And that was a #1 in the States. I think maybe even top 5 over here or something like that. But yeah, this was my the big #1 single, that I'm very, very proud of to this day. Because I love Elton and I love what we've done over the years. And I've maybe written, 15, 20 songs. I really don't know actually for certain, but some great moments all the way around.
Yeah, that album is unbelievably good, and it is definitely the case that people tend to focus on the '70s work, and I can see why, because that era, you first joined a Madman Across the Water, right? That was the first time.
I was a session player. Gus Dudgeon, I knew Gus previously because he produced Magna Carta, who I was working with, and he invited me to play on the title track, Madman, because they tried it with a couple of guys and it hadn't quite worked the way that they thought it might. So Gus said, we'd like you to try it and do the session anyway, because he's going to cut songs for his new album. So I'd never met Elton. So I said, sure. I didn't even know that much about him at all, except I knew he'd recently had success at the Troubadour, and it was a big deal. And I think the Melody Maker did the front page and the center page thing about, as they did back then.
Yeah.
So the buzz was out, but I still wasn't too aware of who he was and what he did. So, I showed up at the studio and I was immediately like going, Jesus Christ, this is huge. There was Gus and there was Paul Buckmaster in the studio as well, because they were doing arrangements live in the studio with a small string section. And there was like Herbie Flowers, one of the greatest bass players of all time, Barry Morgan, Terry Cox, another drummer from Pentangle who I adored. Ray Cooper was on that session. And meanwhile, I'm less 19-year-old kid going like, this is huge, and so I met Elton. He was very shy, very reserved, and he played the beginning of Madman, and he said, so we want a guitar intro. And I just went, well, how about that? And the first thing that I played, they went, that's it. And it was like, okay, good. And so we continued, we cut that track, and then we cut Tiny Dancer, Leave On, and Holiday Inn, which was the track that I was originally booked for to play banjo. And I remember saying, well, actually, I don't think banjo is going to work. I think it should be mandolin. And I ended up playing mandolin and sitar on that track. So I kind of got into that session doing what I normally do, which is offering ideas up. And Elton seemed to love all the ideas, because the next day I got the call to join.
Did you think? Because I remember speaking to Nigel and him sort of saying that when he first rehearsed, it was like within the first 4 bars, I knew that this was the kind of music that I wanted to play, and everything kind of clicked after his years in whatever other bands, like Plastic Penny and stuff. So
right.
when you did Madman Across the Water, did you kind of think, this might be something that I end up doing for a while, or were you did it take longer for you to think, God, this is amazing?
Well, it took a little while, because I wasn't really thinking of terms of how completely crazy the whole thing would become. I was a little bit nervous when I got invited to join the band, because I knew they were a trio, and I just had a feeling, and I loved the trio, by the way. And when I heard the live album, I loved it. I thought it was some of the best stuff I'd heard. But I was a little reserved because, I was a folkie in those days, a total folkie. I mean, the the long hair, the Afghan coat, you know, the acoustic guitar, the mandolin, the sitar, very kind of peace and love and all that shit. And I loved it. I was an incredible string band more than I was anybody else. You know, that's what I liked. And so when we went to record the first band album, which was Honky Chateau, that's when I met all the guys. I mean, I'd met Nigel briefly during Bernie Taupin's poetry album, which was fun. But I had never met Dee. And I sensed this kind of not thrilled vibe, you know, from the other guys. And yeah, I think because, well, you know, suddenly there was a guitar player coming in out of nowhere, and maybe they had friends who they knew better that they thought maybe should get the gig or whatever. I don't know, whatever their reasons, but they weren't very pleased. But when we started playing in the studio almost immediately, and running through stuff and just starting to do things, it became quite apparent that this was going to be something very special. And I think what nailed it together was when we were doing the background vocals for Rocket Man. Yeah. Because it was the first time we'd all sung together. And suddenly we realized that our voices just totally clicked and made sense, you know. And, you know, and then I add all the guitar stuff. It was kind of spacey and interesting and fun. And it became, okay, we can do this now. And that's when I realized that I can do this. I can do this kind of, this morph into rock and roll, except I'll probably have to do a lot more drugs and, you know, have a lot more sex with a lot of groupies and drink more and wear more outrageous clothes. And that didn't sound bad.
Yeah, it sounds all right. So yeah, I mean, that is a very good point about UD and Nigel, the background vocals, because when it comes to great 70s bands, you know, there's the Eagles, there's Crosby, Stills and Nash, Queen, Fleetwood Mac, but your guys' background vocals are, you know, they're just as good. They're like so rich, that blend. And was it literally all three of you standing around the microphone working out your parts?
Well, actually, Gus devised a different way of doing it because, yeah, we did work our parts out right there and then. That's what we did. And the ideas came thick and fast from each one of us, which was another great reason that it worked out, I think. But no, Gus developed a way of doing it because our voices are so dissimilar. I mean, Nigel's got a very kind of really kind of laser sharp point to his voice. I've got much more of a husky middle kind of tone. So, but as it is, again, this all made sense. Dee's voice could be a little lower, but with a bit more edge, so he could handle the bass parts and have them come through. So we had this natural trio, you know, of this is how this works. And in most cases, that's the format we stuck to. But what Gus did was he mic'd us all individually so that he could control the mix a little bit. So even though our blend was already pretty good, in fact, really good, he was able to just fine tune it by having us all on separate mics. So there was an ambient mic and there was 3 separate mics for each of us individually. And yeah, it worked.
Did you have to like double track those vocals, or was it literally just, or like triple track, or because you hear about Queen, you know, doing 100 tracks of vocals or something?
Well, we never got to that point of doing that many tracks. We thought, and that was, I mean, that's wonderful what they did, and it was just a different sound. Orchestrated. Yeah, it's very orchestrated. No, we'd always double track our parts at least, and sometimes quadruple, and sometimes, you know, depending on what. Well, look, in those days, if you think about it, we were doing this with 16 track, Honky Cat, and Don't Shoot Me, and I think we finally progressed to 24 track on Yellow Brick Road, but still. We'd have to fit things on the end of a tambourine track, we'll put some vocals in there, we'll put the guitar solo on another part of, you know, this is the way you made things work. So as much as we could bounce back and forward, we never really wanted to do that too much. So I would say that the most we ever did was do 3 or 4 tracks on one vocal part. The one exception was when we did Someone Saved My Life Tonight, and to a certain extent, Harmony. Those were tracks that we spent a bit more time on, and we overlapped and we did different sections that came in on top of another section. But bearing in mind, in those days, you couldn't just fly a vocal in if it was really good. You know, nowadays, if you do a part that you're happy with and you sing backgrounds on a whole chorus, say, for example, and even if there's a lot of vocals, you can then take that and just put it into the next chorus,
Yeah,
and so on. Nowadays, you know, in the old days, you couldn't do that. You'd have to do every chorus one by one. So it was actually painstaking. And,
long process.
you know, yeah, Elton would actually leave. You know, when the background started, he would say, all right, I'm out of here. And we'd welcome that, because we didn't want him sitting on the couch and farting and saying, oh, come on, hurry up, you know. So we were glad when he left.
It gave you a bit more time, yeah, to be creative. But yeah, it's kind of, it's like human choice now is so, with all the tech that we've got, is so wide. And sometimes there is something to be said for limited options. And it seems like you worked very, very immediately. And in terms of that unbelievable run as the Elton John Band, you know, like Honky Chateau, Don't Shoot Me, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Caribou, Captain Fantastic. I mean, that's my favorite run of albums. You know, I think that's unbelievable.
Oh, wow.
So is that your most kind of fondly remembered period? Like, are those the records that you would sort of say, okay, this is, if someone had said, oh, I've never heard of Elton John, no idea who you guys are, and you guys had to get some albums out to show them, is that what you'd pull out first if you were trying to impress them?
I don't know. Probably. Those are the songs that seem to capture the imagination of the world, really, back then. So yeah, probably. Although, you know, there's a part that many people who haven't seen the band live, for example, tend to say, well, yeah, it was very kind of safe rock and roll or something. Or they might say that maybe they haven't listened closely enough to Saturday Night's Alright for Fighting or Bitches Back and some of these other songs that were just rocking songs, you know. So I tend to think, well, maybe you should just, you know, if a person hadn't seen or heard of Elton John, I would say, come and see the show. Then you'll get an idea, because they're usually my fondest moments. I mean, I have loved recording, and I do love recording to this day. But to go back to what you just said a second ago about choices and having to go with something and make a decision on a solo, say, or an echo that you want to use or something that you want to use, you have to commit to that kind of thing. So that worked perfectly well for Elton and for me, because I work really quickly, which made me and Elton, you know, soul brothers in that way, because he loves to work quickly. So in many cases, my first guitar solo would be the one that I would go for, you know, and that's the one we'd use. And so, you know, I'm thrilled about all that work we did. And I'm also extremely grateful for the fact that we were able to come back in the 80s. Although when I think about it, we had no doubt about that we'd do something great. We just got back together because we knew that worked, you know. I don't think any of us expected it to be as big as it became in the 80s again, and then follow on from there. Maybe that's just the way the times are going in those days, because many acts who happened and had a couple of years of giant success, suddenly they're gone forever, you know, and they're only just getting some airtime again today because people are loving looking back at some great music from that period.
Yeah, but I mean, of acts in the 70s, who first became huge in the 70s, there are probably people who are at the top of the charts with you guys now who, you know, have a much more limited audience. Whereas, you know, I guess along with maybe 2 or 3 other acts, you know, this music is still some of the most listened to in the world, which is great. And it's not just the 80s. You know, another point that's pretty interesting is the resurgence in the 90s. And the One album, which I think is really good, and one of my favorites. You know, do you think that? How do you feel about the production on it? Do you think if it had been produced differently, it could have been like better regarded? Because I mean, I kind of like the 90s production. It's just something a bit different. But the title track as well, I really think that's one of the best songs that he ever wrote.
It's a great song. Great song. No, I think you're right. I mean, and that's a very good point about the production, the 90s production. Because this was Chris Thomas again, and having worked with Chris through the 80s, and just a brilliant producer. In fact, I think Gus Dudgeon only did Ice on Fire. He came back for that album. And see, all those guys that we've worked with over the years are all so talented and so clever. I mean, I've been a fan of Chris Thomas forever. We met up at Paul McCartney's place in like 1977, I think, when I was up there taking my youngest on a road trip through Scotland, and we stopped by Paul's, and they were doing one of the albums up there, one of the Wings albums, and I met Chris at that point. So we kind of vaguely knew each other, but when we started working together, we had the best time, and Chris and I became such close friends, and he was best man at my wedding to my current wife, Kay. So we've kept this whole association going. But I loved his production on that album for a very specific reason, is that Chris has always been, see, he can make an album like the Sex Pistols album, which is as raw as they come. I mean, I don't think there's a raw album ever been done. You know, they did it in like a day or something, and it's a fabulous sounding rock and roll album. I love that record. And Chris did that. But when it came to, for example, the One, that's the other end of the scale, where computers had come into it, and, you know, sequencers. And we had Ula Roma, who did the drum tracks for us, and the drums sounded great. I mean, you might get a lot of purists saying, oh yeah, but it's not real drums. But you know what? They sound fucking amazing. I think they sound fabulous, you know. And so, you know, you gotta have an open mind about that kind of stuff. And Chris really did have an open mind. So he was willing to insert himself into this new way of working and this whole wholly digital world, which is not an easy transition, really.
Yeah, he's one of the great producers, and obviously there's a lot of focus on Gus Dudgeon, whose work with you guys was amazing. But yeah, Chris Thomas as well, and then you worked with George Martin, of course, on Made in England. So that must have been, you're a big Beatles fan, from what I know. So what was that, like a kind of dream come true?
Absolutely. I mean, George, my God, everybody loved George. That's simple. You know, we love him to death. I love his son. I love Giles, and I love their family, basically, and all the people that surrounded George, you know, the people who worked with him and assisted him. And of course, being a massive Beatles fan, you know, and having met and worked with John in the 70s, which was just an incredible event. That whole thing, that whole year was just remarkable. And, you know, and getting to know Ringo, and I'm still good friends with him. I see him regularly. And so working with George back then on that album, on the Made in England, I think that'd be what, 93, something like that, 93, 94, I can't remember exactly. But we were doing it at George's new studio, Air Lyndhurst, up in Hampstead, and I was living there. They got a house for me for the duration of my stay there. So I was there with Kane and our first child, and we just had a wonderful time, because I love London. I've always loved it. I love being there. And the idea of George, because he was in and out of the studio and he was digging what we were doing, he was loving it, and he's always such a gentleman and so sweet, you know. Yeah. And we wrote a song called Latitude, and it's very folky, and I'm on lots of acoustics and mandocellos and all really organic, fun English style instruments. And he loved the track. And so Elton was like, well, would you do a string arrangement? And he was like, I'd love to, dear boy, no problem. And it was like, whoa, okay. And when I heard what he did, it made me think of something like The Atmosphere, when I first heard You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, or something like that, or something whereby there'd be, you know, just or maybe even Yesterday with a string quartet. It was that kind of approach to writing beautiful string arrangements for a song, and it was so sympathetic and so beautiful. And yeah, that made my year back then.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great album. Latitude's a great tune, and I mean, yeah, some people listening to this won't be aware that George Martin produced, you know, a 90s album with you guys, but that is the extent to which you guys have done so many different things over, you know, is it what, like 30 plus albums? I think it's something ridiculous. In any case,
I have no clue.
And so, like, in the last few years, I think it's been harder for people to make records and to like have them catch on, because all our attention spans are so much smaller. But you guys have been making some great records. Like, I really like Peachtree Road, for example, and Captain and the Kid. You know, those were kind of Elton John Band records again. Do you have any favorites out of like the kind of latter day ones? You know, Wonderful Crazy Night, Captain and the Kid, Peachtree Road, or Songs from the West Coast?
Yeah, I mean, I really, thanks for reminding me of those titles, because I'm just, you know, for the later ones, I tend to forget, because it's kind of unfortunate and a little bit sad occasionally that an artist like Elton, or, you know, people like us who have made music that many people have gone, oh my God, this is the soundtrack of my youth. A lot of people will say, a soundtrack of our lives. In fact, many people have said. And so later on, when you attempt to, you know, to make another album because you think you're still valid or whatever, and nothing much happens with it, it is unfortunate, because it makes you think, well, nobody gives a shit anymore. So maybe we shouldn't really bother about making too many records. And I think that started to creep in more laterally, and also because I think many record companies that we were working with honestly didn't know how to promote us or sell what we were doing amidst all these other things. And in the start of the 2000 and so on. But yeah, I loved so many things. I loved I Want Love from Songs from the West Coast, which was just a great period of time, because that was right at the point when I had got Nigel back into the band, because Nigel didn't play in the band for 17 years, which I know sounds ridiculous, but I mean, it was a long time. I'd brought him back in as a background vocalist, and it was great fun, and we did really well. And then one day I asked him, you know, how's your stamina? Could you keep up your stamina to play like a concert? And he went, well, I'll work on it. And that's how it all began. And so after we came back into the band, and it was obvious, Nigel's, you know, it's his birthright to be Elton's drummer. That's what he does. You know, that's what he is. He's Elton John's drummer and background vocalist. So it's wonderful that all happened again. So that's a very special track for me.
Of you to do, you know, like in a sense, because a lot of people, it's a difficult position to get in, to be, you know, musical director to one of the biggest stars in the world. Was it a difficult risk, you know, to kind of like stick up for your friend and show kind of loyalty without wanting to ruffle any feathers? I mean, obviously you did it because you thought the music would sound better, but it's also, you know, it's a difficult move. And by the sounds of things, you know, it maybe took a little bit of persuasion at first. So was it difficult?
Absolutely. Well, nothing like that like that is going to be easy. Anything in life that's you know, whoa, this is big. Can we do this? You know, especially when it involves personalities and all the rest of it. And you know, musically, we've had so many great drummers. You know, from Sugarfoot, you know, Jonathan Moffat, who worked with Michael Jackson all these years, and Charlie Morgan. I mean, just amazing part of our band for 10 or 11 years, I believe. I mean, just remarkable. Jack Bruno, who worked with Tina Turner and Joe Cocker and all these people, great players, all of them. Kurt Biscara, who, I mean, he was the last guy before Nigel. But my point about all this was, look, if we're going to continue to play as a band and play Elton music as it's known and loved, there's only one guy who can do this properly, the way that it should be done.
Yeah.
And that's Nigel. And that's kind of the way I put it to Elton. And also, you know, I said, you know, I think I said at the time, as long as he can keep up his strength and get back into playing the kind of sets we do, which are, you know, it's not for the soft-hearted. These sets are very tiring. You know, when you're playing 2.5 hours to 3 hours every night, that'll get to you. And so that was one of my main worries. But no, Nigel, you know, just good for he rose to the challenge, and he wanted to do it so badly anyway. So, you know, he's back with us and has been now for the last 20 years, and God bless him, because I mean, we're so fortunate, Tom. If you think about it, to have a career. I can talk about the past 20 years. I mean,
And
this is ridiculous.
part of it.
I know. Bands don't last that long. It doesn't happen. I mean, unless you're the Rolling Stones, and obviously they've had some death, some tragedy in their band, like everybody's going to have in life over the years. But you know, they're still rolling. You know, God bless the Stones. I adore them. You know, but really, it's not a normal thing to have to be in a rock and roll band for this long. It's insane. But then you think, well, why not? Because I understand it as good as anybody. I still play it as good as anybody, quite frankly. And you know, once you get over the jibes about people who are maybe a little bit jealous or envious or whatever, you know, you get people who are maybe a bit mean-spirited, and they'll maybe go, oh, these fucking dinosaurs, they're back again and they're doing their thing. When are they going to retire? You know, and the truth is, well, we actually are going out, because we're in the middle of a farewell tour now. But we've always been so, you know, gung-ho about our music and feel very strongly about it, that it's like, you know what, fuck you, we'll be doing this, and this is what we do. So really, it's none of your business if we do this or don't do it. It's something, when you're an artist and you believe in your art, you do it. You don't just sit around and think, oh, somebody said bad things about it, I better not do that, I better not do that. Like, screw that, we don't do that. We've always gone straight for the throat, you know. That's what we do.
I think you know, I defy younger, you know, edgier in inverted commas bands to kind of play like you guys do, because it is pretty difficult to play for 2 hours and 40 minutes night after night, and so, you know, in terms of like the last albums, you know, you're sort of saying, I mean, I guess What I Want Love was a huge hit, but I'd say part of it is that people really like music. You know, when something gets really stuck into their head and it becomes a soundtrack to their lives, it doesn't matter if you guys wrote, like, you know, Abbey Road or something, and, you know, something like that. It would just be very, very difficult, because they've already got so many tracks from you that they love, and they probably don't have that capacity. So is that kind of why it tends to be that you guys work on an album, love it, put it in the set list, and then sort of slowly, bit by bit, it will go from like 5 songs to 4 songs to 3 songs to kind of then back to the same thing? Is it just because it gets a bit tiring to have people go to the toilet during the new album?
Exactly. Very good. Very good point. It's so true, man. You know, you can see him sometimes. You can see him heading up the aisles, you know, like we start playing I forget what it was, you know, something maybe that's not so well known. I forget what it was. Anyway, we'd always go, oh, there they go, you know, there they go up the, you know, see them walking up the aisles to the bathroom. But that's going to happen anyway to any act. I think the people have their favorites, and people, you know, I mean, when I went to see McCartney recently, a year ago or something, it was awesome. I loved the show. I absolutely loved it. And I love McCartney. Who doesn't, you know?
Yeah.
Although I didn't hear an echo in there, but I really think he's great, and I love some of I know his band, and they're great guys and great players. But I still, when I was at Dodger Stadium watching that show, there was many people who got up and then they sit down the next song because they didn't know it or they weren't too familiar with it. So, you know, it happens for everybody. But you're absolutely, your point about it starting off with maybe 5 songs in the set when you're promoting this new album that comes out, and then it'll dwindle down. Well, I'll leave that one out because nobody had a clue what the fuck that was, and so on, until you maybe have the one track that's the current single that you have to play because the record company is kind of trying to promote it, and you supposedly played it on the Tonight Show, and we played it on The View, and we played it on other things like that, you know. So yeah, it is very frustrating because you think, well, you know, they're pretty good songs, and I'm with you. I liked some of the stuff on Peachtree Road a lot, and The Captain and the Kid a hell of a lot. I thought there was some really beautiful stuff on that. I thought the bridge was as good as anything that he wrote ballad-wise in the 70s or 80s. I thought it was a remarkable song, and it was very much a band record because we did it on our own in a rehearsal room in Atlanta, and one of them we did at Tree Studios in Atlanta as well. So, you know, I think you have to grow quite a tough shell so that you don't give up and think that, well, there's no place for me anymore in this business, so I'll just disappear quietly. Well, that's never really been Elton's style anyway. So,
Sure.
so you know, and plus we have so many songs. We have such a giant, deep, uh, potential set list if we ever want to change things, and that's so we're able to do that. We're able to bring songs that many people who come and see this farewell tour, for example, they might never have heard. Have Mercy on the Criminal. They might never have heard Indian Sunset, and several songs like that that are very, very much a part of this farewell tour set. And people go, wow, I haven't heard that one. That's so great. And so, you've always got to remember that it's important that people will respect whatever you do as long as you do it honestly, I think.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, it's kind of unfair in a way to just focus on the fact that it can be difficult to make great albums land in the same way that the old records did, in the sense that, you guys are killing it live, and it's got bigger recently. Even though it was consistently arenas, which is, the top level type of thing, but kind of on the farewell tour, probably due to maybe Rocket Man, the book and stuff like that. I don't know, maybe just you guys were playing so well, word of mouth, whatever it was. But it's kind of going like stadiums again now, isn't it? Which is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, it really is. But I mean, it's wonderful, but it made sense. I think maybe Elton might have been a little bit unsure about going straight for the stadiums in the farewell tours, which is why we kind of started off with the tour with a lot of those arena shows the first year. But then as soon as we got to Australia, especially, I think, then it became quite obvious that so many people, in a country that's as big as Australia, but really they don't have the population of this country, for example, the United States, but people were just flocking and couldn't get enough of it. It became quite obvious that, all right, this is going to be just all the way out. It's going to be full tilt, gigantic. And it's wonderful to think that many people want to come and see us do this farewell tour. And I think that's another reason there's a lot of buzz about it, because everybody who's seen the show is loving it. So I'm sure that word of mouth in this day and age, and social media and all the rest of it, which, by the way, I don't do any, so I wouldn't know, but the word of mouth is really, really great. And the general feeling from people. And as you said, being involved with his movie and the book, to a certain extent, that whole run in Vegas that we did for like 10 years, a few months of the year, each year we did, that obviously made a big difference to people's opinion or attitude towards us as well.
Yeah, it certainly did. I was disappointed as a fan, and I kind of think, the Elton John Band, Bruce's band, the E Street Band, got in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think a lot of fans would like you guys to get in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I think that would be nice, because a lot of fans, appreciate the Elton John Band on the same level as they appreciate Elton. A lot of music fans don't care about superstars. They just care about killer players. People like Elton John because he's a great songwriter. He's a great musician. Most people couldn't care less about celebrity, or at least I hope there are still people out there who don't. It was a bit dispiriting in some ways, even though I thought it was a cool movie, to not see you guys in Rocket Man. Did that get to you, or did you just think, this is what it is? I mean, I know you were in it, but just there weren't, I was kind of hoping for a film version of like you guys cutting Goodbye Yellow Brick Road or something.
Right. Yeah. Well, it wasn't. I knew ahead of seeing it what it was going to be like. Elton had told me, this is the movie I want to make, and it was mainly about his recovery, as you saw, and different things and sexual things throughout his life that were always a bit challenging for him and for everybody and all the rest of it. So he kind of laid it out to me that, but I must admit I was disappointed. I can't say I wasn't, because, there was never even there wasn't a name check for any of the band members, not even, and it would have been nice to hear your name in a movie that basically, anyway, it was disappointing to me. And then, of course, when there was a band in the movie, I guess, in a couple of different places, but it was all wrong. It was like a 5-piece band when it should have been 3, and there was it was all totally wrong. It was almost like, well, at least get that part right, but no, it was a lot of problems. I don't want to dwell on this too much because just as long as you know that I think it would have been better if a few people like Gus Dudgeon and Paul Buckmaster had been mentioned throughout, in some way in this movie, because these are people who were so important at making his career happen and helping his career happen. In fact, it wouldn't have happened without these people, and I think that's a shame. But as Elton said to me, this was the kind of movie I want to make, so I have to accept that, and I'm fine with it. But I do want to mention that I have been making a documentary with Dee Murray's first wife. We started piecing together some old footage and old interviews and stuff like that years ago. And I agreed to keep it on hold until after his movie and after his book, which makes total sense. I didn't want to step on the feet of anything that's happening with his his thing. And it's done very well. So I'm very happy for him. But within the next year or so, I'll be releasing a documentary that I've been working with Annette Murray and my son Tam, who's directing it. And as I said, we're collecting old footage, old interviews and recent interviews, and putting together some pretty killer stuff and stuff that people have never seen. So it's going to be quite exciting for many fans, I think, to see some of this stuff.
Yeah, people will love that. Hopefully it will get on Netflix, You can imagine something like that doing really well on Netflix, kind of like the story about Elton John's music that you didn't know, for the casual listeners who've just heard it on the radio. I can see people just watching that on things like Netflix and it getting pretty huge. And I mean, it's very clear from what you say, it's nothing but love and respect for Elton. And it's not like, you were just more saying about it's just great to give people credit. And it probably wouldn't have made the movie any less enjoyable, but it's been great to see its success because it's enabled to keep, playing even bigger venues. But I definitely would have wanted to see you guys, but the documentary will be even better for sure. So
absolutely. Well, the fun thing about that, just to say, so I can say that the thing is, our movie is definitely the documentary I'm making is definitely the musical side of things and the people who are involved in making that kind of thing. It's not some sensational tell-all. It's very funny, very fucking funny in places. And there's some very poignant moments. In fact, I watched a couple of things that my son sent, that Tam sent last night. And I was in tears because there's some beautiful, moving stuff to do with the people that were involved in this thing. And I think that's important to capture that, so they should get their say too. And by the way, what you mentioned about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Nigel and I talked about it a couple of times and it was like, wow, yeah, we've been totally overlooked. And, I know Bruce's band really well. I know Roy and Nils and Max and those guys, and God bless them. They're great. And, they're in there and you're going like, well, we were happening before they were happening even, and we've been totally missed out. So yeah, it's a good, so thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, well, I think, I'll try and bring it up where I can, as this podcast continues to gather steam. I was tweeting the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame a little bit about it. I mean, it should be possible because I looked at, they've got a whole category for bands, and there are lots of bands.
Oh, really?
There are lots of bands, I think like Elvis's band being put in there. I mean, it's not like it's not a completely, ridiculous thing. So hopefully the documentary will also help that, which a lot of people can't wait for. So I think, I've got a couple more questions for you to wrap things up. But I know this one will probably be on a lot of fans' mind. And that is, the last album that you guys made was Wonderful Crazy Night. At this stage of the game where you've got a mammoth tour, COVID's delayed the tour, we're now looking at late 21 maybe for the dates in the UK. Do you reckon it's probably a stretch to say that you guys will ever make another record?
I would say right now that's a stretch because of the obvious circumstances. Elton's always going to do some recording, I would think. In fact, I'm certain of it. He's just been doing some work for one of the musical theater stuff that we've done ever since The Lion King. You know, we became very important as far as doing stuff for stage plays, even movies, whatever, and that's become a very big avenue for Elton, and a very big earner for him also, for very good reason, because he's done great work with it. And we've done some stuff that's coming up recently. I believe Devil Wears Prada will be one of the ones that's coming up, and also a documentary, a film a stage musical on the life of Tammy Faye Baker. So there's some great stuff. So he'll always have that thing open to him, and I know he just did a couple of those things recently. As far as another album, he may, once we get done with the farewell tour or whatever, hopefully he'd give me a call and say, you know, do you want to help me make an album? And it was like, and my answer would be immediately yes, because I love working with that guy. There's no question about it. I've worked with a lot of people. There's no question in my mind. He is the most talented person I've ever worked with. And I've worked with all kinds of people, as you well know. And he is the man. He's the guy. I mean, he's the best singer who never sings out of tune. It never happens with Elton. And as far as his playing, forget about it. I mean, there's nobody. Let me give you a clue. One of the last gigs we did before we started the farewell tour, we were invited to play the New Orleans Jazz Festival, and which is a big honor. And we were happy to do it because we'd recently, before that, just done Bonnaroo, and we'd done the Outside Lands in San Francisco and a couple of other festivals. And it was really having fun. We were having a lot of fun doing it. And he came to me one day and he said, so this New Orleans Jazz Festival, Jerry Lee Lewis is on right before us. And I went, yeah. And he said, well, I'm shitting myself about that. I said, why? He said, well, Christ, you know, I learned to play all that rock and roll shit from him. And plus, you know, he might call me a fag or something. And I burst out, I cracked up. And I'm going, well, listen, man, he's going to love me, because he'd never met him either. So I said, he's going to love you. He already loves your music, I can guarantee. And sure enough, when we got to the site of the festival site that day, Jerry Lee was right on just before us. And he met up with Elton, and he was in a wheelchair, and he couldn't have been nicer. He couldn't have been more sweet to Elton, and they had a big hug, and I could tell Elton was just so thrilled in every way. And we went on and killed the audience too. So, you know, I mean, it's funny how you have respect, obviously, because that's what you do for people that have inspired you over the years, and that's the great thing about music, that I think that people have gotten maybe the wrong idea, because there's a lot of backbiting these days between artists, be it on Twitter or Facebook or whatever it is they do, and they start calling each other names. And Elton wasn't entirely, you know, innocent of that. He had a pretty good feud going with Keith for a while, which was hilarious, I thought. And now they love each other. And the Madonna one was pretty good too, you know. And
those things though make you crack up though, because it's not on Twitter, you know. It's like it's on TV. These things were on TV or whatever. Keith looks like a monkey with arthritis, and then I can't remember. Elton can only write songs about dead blondes. I mean, they were pretty like big lines. Right. At least they were witty, and you could tell they were kind of half-hearted, because you know. Yeah. I think he's played with the Stones and stuff. Like, they're obviously friends. And
absolutely.
Don't you?
Absolutely. I think when you reach a certain celebrity level, a certain status, you can say what you want about anybody else, and it's kind of accepted, or it's accepted, as you said, in kind of a jocular way, and it's, at least it's funny. At least it is funny. Exactly. It's not just sniping for the hell of it. You know, there's actually some very interesting exchanges that you'll like to recount, that I do recount with pleasure sometimes at the dinner table. If I have 5 guests over and we're talking about a certain thing, and you know, somebody's name will come up, and there'll invariably be a really good story about somebody. So
yeah, I mean, it must have been an amazing life with these stories, and you know, the sense of humor that you guys have is part of I think what makes the fans love the dynamic, you know. So my final kind of question for you is, this series is called Greatest Music of All Time. And, you know, sometimes we even get people who aren't musicians and are kind of, you know, cultural icons in other ways to just talk about their favorite records. So I always love to ask musicians who their favorite artists are, who their favorite inspirations are. So it'd be great to hear kind of, you know, who are the artists who are kind of like the greats who made you want to play, or maybe as well as that, you know, like your contemporaries, people who were big at the same time who you love. And then if there's anything that you listen to now, like more modern type of stuff, if there is any that you like, who those kind of names would be.
Wow, that's going to be a long list, I think. But well, definitely starting when I was 5 years old, my sisters, who were much older than me, had a record player, and I was like the afterthought in the family. I was the baby of the family. But when they played Jailhouse Rock, they had the 78s, they had Jailhouse Rock, they had All Shook Up, they had Heartbreak Hotel. When I heard those records, it was like, what is this? This is what I want to hear. I don't want to hear, I mean, as great as Frank Sinatra was, I wasn't really turned on by him as a young kid. But when I heard Elvis and Buddy Holly and Little Richard, it spoke to me. It screamed at me, in fact. So that was the first influence. And then when I was 11 and my sister bought me an acoustic guitar, Hank Marvin became my first real guitar icon, because he was just brilliant, and he is still brilliant. I actually I've met Hank a few times, and I love him. And his daughter, in fact, came to one of our shows in Australia recently. And then next one would be the Beatles, because anybody who played guitar or who plays guitar, you couldn't miss the fact that I got to learn this song. I got to learn how to play that, because George was playing all these iconic riffs like Day Tripper and stuff, and you were going like, oh my God, I got to learn that. The difference was, see, I didn't have our family was quite poor, so I couldn't afford to go out and buy all these records as they came out. So you'd have to sit and listen to Radio Luxembourg, or later Radio Caroline, later, you know, this kind of thing, to hear the rock and roll. And so I'd sit with my guitar in my room and with a little transistor radio, and I'd wait for the records to come on. And if Route 66 by the Stones came on, I'd be like, oh my God, this is great. And I'd sit there and play along with it. And I'd learn Keith's solo in that, which I think many kids of my, you know, generation at that point, that's what we did. You learned to play what the Beatles and the Stones were playing. So it was massive for me. So moving fast forwarding on, well, not really fast, not that many years, but like the Incredible String Band became my next, you know, iconic thing, where I wanted to play everything that they did. I wanted to dress like them. I wanted to smoke as much hash as they were obviously smoking, and I managed to do all of those things, which was great. And then getting a bit deeper in acoustic guitar, John Martin, amazing guitar player, one of the best guitar players of all time, who's also a very dear friend of mine, and he taught me my first open G tuning on the guitars. And John, superb, brilliant. Billy Connolly with the Humble Bums. They were playing in folk clubs when I was starting to play there when I was 15. So massive influence on me. Bert Jansch, John Renbourn, these guys, because I wanted to learn how they played what they played, and I had no idea how they did it. And so I just have to sit there and work it out for myself. So those guys were huge for me. The Dubliners, Barney McKenna, mainly because he played tenor banjo like I'd never heard. So I learned to do that and play mandolin along the way, like with people like Dave Swarbrick and Martin Carthy. So I was a big student of those people in those days. And then when I joined Elton, I started to hear, I mean, all through my career, obviously, you couldn't miss the Beatles, the Stones, you couldn't miss Hendrix, you couldn't miss Led Zeppelin, because they were also extremely folky as well as being super heavy on the other end. So this is all the stuff that this was what I was learning, all these different things. And then as after I joined Elton and we were making our own records that were becoming very successful, I started to listen to people that were a bit different, maybe like Little Feat. Little Feat became super important in my life in 1974 and onward. And the Meters, the Meters were just amazing. And in fact, I played those records to John Lennon when we met, and we were talking about what we liked. And he'd never heard Little Feat. So I played him that. I played him the Meters. I played him Rock of Ages by the band, and you know, in turn, he would answer some groupie questions I had for him. So it was really cool. But yeah, just kind of like that. And then later on, because I always loved listening to stuff, Elton and I we were the main guys who listened to other people's music as it went on, because we wanted to keep current with what was happening. So in fact, he played me Wham, and when it came out, and I fucking loved what these guys were doing.
Right,
I
right.
loved it, and the tracks were awesome. You know, I mean, Wake Me Up with Dion's bass playing and that whole thing, and George Michael singing. Obviously, it was like, okay, this is going to be huge, you know. And for me, Lenny Kravitz, when that happened, I could not believe that first record. And I was delighted, you know, a month later to hear that Elton also loved it, because by then, he was in England, I was over here. But my wife Kay and I, this is before we were married, we were in New York and hanging out for a couple of weeks. And Lenny was going to be playing at the, what's it called? The Palladium, I think it's called, something like that. It's, you know, it's a theater. And we went, and I'm standing in line to get my ticket for Lenny Kravitz with my wife. And one of the roadies came out, saw me, and he said, Davey, what are you doing here? I said, well, I'm waiting to buy my ticket. He said, fuck that. Come with me. Lenny's going to freak that you're here. So I went backstage and met Lenny. We had a big giant hug.
Wow.
And it kind of right there, it brought back to me, because he said, oh man, you know, I'm like one of your biggest fans. It was like that kind of exchange. And I said, well, I'm your biggest fan right now. So it brought back that lovely feeling that contemporary artists can have love for people that you know have been around for a while, because we made a difference to their life. So that kind of thing has happened to me, you know, even happens to me right now when I meet people like Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam, or, you know, Jerry and Mike from Alice in Chains and bands like that. You know, these are the guys, Matt Sorum, you know, meet legendary drummers and players who you're working with and who have the same kind of loves as you do. That to me has been my greatest thrill of the last few years, to know that there's all these people out there that are still passionate about what they do.
Yeah. I mean, and they definitely recognize the huge influence that you've had. And it was very interesting to hear as well about the kind of folk side, because you know, people when they listen to your records will appreciate that, you know, one minute it's the mandolin, the next minute it's the sitar or the acoustic, or, you know, it's playing what's right for the track. It's not just kind of ripping out the electric guitar and soloing on top of a track, which, you know, a lot of guitarists can do, you know, and obviously you bring it when you need to,
Right.
on the heavier rock tracks, but it's that versatility, I think, that's obviously contributed a lot to you, you know, being the musical director of such a huge band, you know, for so many years. So Davey, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It was an absolute pleasure. Really great to talk to you. And yeah, thanks for all the many years of incredible music. I hope you're able to get back on the road soon. And looking
Thank you.
for the album, the documentary, and everything else.
Well, thank you so much, Tom. It was really fun. I really enjoyed this, and great that you're so knowledgeable about stuff that we've done and all the rest of it. And it was a very enjoyable conversation, man. So thanks, and hope to maybe I'll see you at a gig next year when we're back over there towards Christmas.
Yeah.